Hey everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to MSTR Daily. In this video, we're going to look at the catalysts for Microstrategy that have already come and gone, and those that we're looking forward to in the future, specifically for this current cycle of 2023 to 2025. We're also going to talk about the SEC approving options trading on IBIT, and last night, the PBOC and Chinese government announced massive fiscal and monetary stimulus to save their stock and real estate market. So we'll look at what that means for Bitcoin and MSTR. But right before that, check out MSTR Pro in the description below for access to my MSTR options trading portfolio. Okay, let's talk about these bullish catalysts for MSTR, but let's start with the catalysts that have already been completed. Okay, at the top, in March, MSTR issued $1.4 billion of convertible notes at a blended interest rate of 0.7% and bought enough Bitcoin to bring their total treasury over 210,000 Bitcoin, which is just over 1% of the total supply. Also, the Bitcoin ETFs launched just before that in January of 2024, which is actually great for MSTR adoption because it increases the amount of liquid capital that can enter the Bitcoin market. MSTR also went from trading under a 1.0 multiple on its Bitcoin holdings right after the ETFs were approved to trading at over a 2x multiple. So the ETF clearly hasn't impacted MSTR's position in the market, and it will continue to trade side-by-side spot ETFs in peace. Next, Saylor finished selling his 400,000 share comp sale that was granted back in 2014, and post-split that is 4 million shares. MSTR went up 300% over the course of this 4-month sale, so clearly it had very little impact on the market, but it's good that it's behind us. MSTR was also added to a few indices in this time. On May 31st, it was added to the MSCI World Index, and in June, it was moved from the Russell 2000 to the Russell 1000. This was a move that was going to eventually happen, but it may have been worse for the stock in the short term because the Russell 2000 is much more popular than the Russell 1000. But it is a natural move as MSTR grows its market cap, and next we have our eyes set on the NASDAQ 100 and S&P 500 indices. The next catalyst that we saw was the 10-to-1 stock split in August. This helps reduce unit bias, which is the tendency for individuals to want to complete a unit of a given item or task. In MSTR's case, it made the options market more affordable and more liquid. It also reset the mental framework around the stock price. A $1,500 stock sounds really expensive, but when you do a 10-to-1 split, now $150 doesn't seem that bad. I feel like a $150 stock could easily go to $1,000 in a bull market, but a $1,000 stock to $10,000? I don't think that'll happen. It seems too expensive. Right, these biases are very real in investing, and the stock split is great for the future of its growth. Here in September, we had a few large catalysts. First, on September 18th, the Fed rate cutting cycle began with a 50 basis point cut. We are likely to see a lot of cuts before the end of 2025. And second, MSTR issued another $1.01 billion worth of convertible notes that allowed them to acquire over 252,000 Bitcoin and break that 250,000 mark. Third, options were approved for the Bitcoin ETFs, which we will talk about later in this video, but needless to say, it's really important. Futures markets and options markets do support large and liquid assets. It's all a part of Bitcoin's growing adoption and maturation as an asset class. Okay, now let's drop down and talk about future catalysts. The first one is MSTR being added to the QQQ or NASDAQ 100 index. The next rebalancing date is the third Friday in December, and from my current understanding, if MSTR is in the top 100 non-financial stocks listed on the NASDAQ, they should be added. Unlike the S&P 500, the NASDAQ doesn't have requirements about positive earnings per share or cumulative profitability, so as long as it stays where it is or increases in market cap even more, it should be added to the index on the third Friday in December. And right now, if MSTR were to be added to the QQQ, it would be the 86th largest company by market cap, just behind Lululemon. This would be such a major move for MSTR because it will continue to bring in passive flows to the stock, which are purchasers at any price. Sally, the accountant in Missouri, isn't saying no to buying MSTR in her 401k because the premium to their Bitcoin holdings is 2.8. No, she passively adds to her 401k each paycheck, and those passive flows get pushed into the QQQ, which then purchases MSTR shares. This has an even greater compounding effect when MSTR gets added to the S&P 500, but we're going to discuss that when FASB accounting changes are adopted in early 2025. The next future catalyst that will happen very soon according to reports. However, as we mentioned last week, bankruptcy distributions can be opaque and lengthy and are usually announced right before they take place. But right now, it is estimated that $16 billion will be returned to FTX creditors who lost funds in the November 2022 crash. This will be returned in cash, not in Bitcoin or other crypto, so there's a strong likelihood that some of those funds will find their way back into Bitcoin. The next catalyst is the FASB fair value accounting changes that should take effect in 2025. This will turn the previous 4 quarters of MSTR's earnings per share positive, and this is the last requirement that MSTR needs to meet to join the S&P 500. So that is going to be a massive story in the first half of next year. We also may have our very own QE5 starting soon. As I'm recording recording this, it was announced that China has just launched their own QE style of monetary stimulus to save their own equity and real estate markets. Before each of the last bull runs, the PBOC has been easing into it, which means that Chinese liquidity is very important for Bitcoin, and it looks like the US will follow suit in the next 15 months. But in the meantime, China is doing their best to avoid a deflationary collapse. The last future catalyst that I listed was Microstrategy reaching 300,000 Bitcoin. Right now, with their recent convertible note and their ATM offering, they should be able to reach the 260 to 270,000 Bitcoin mark. And I think that next year they should be able to offer some very cheap converts with the increase in volatility and up their stack to 300,000 Bitcoin. This will be another incredible milestone for MicroStrategy. There are also a few other catalysts that will be added to future updates. The first is the increase in the US debt ceiling, which is supposed to happen in early January 2025. The US will halt its borrowing, and the Treasury Department will have to take extensive measures to fund the government's liabilities and expenses, while Congress argues for a month and then comes to a midnight deal, and the train of taking on a monstrous pile of debt continues. These extensive measures is just draining the TGA, which is basically the government's bank account. It holds an ample amount of cash for government expenses, but when they can no longer borrow because of the debt ceiling, it has a stimulatory effect as the government is spending money into the economy without saving back up by issuing bonds. I also forgot to add the Bitcoin halving, which happened back in April. The impact of that compounds every 10 minutes with each new block, and then also I'm going to add the ability for banks to custody Bitcoin. There were rumors that BNY Mellon was getting special approval by the SEC to custody Bitcoin, and if this happens alongside SAB 121 getting overturned, which it should in time because it passed both the House and the Senate before getting vetoed by President Biden, the political will to get this SEC regulation overturned is there, but it may need to come with a new administration, both red or blue. For our next story, we have the news that on Friday, the SEC approved options trading on BlackRock's ETF, IBIT. We do not have a launch date for the options chain yet, but it is no longer restricted by the SEC, so I'm assuming that this will happen soon. As I said at the beginning of the video, options markets are very important for financial liquidity and hedging, which is a must for institutional adoption of Bitcoin. And here's a tweet that outlines the impact well. James Lavish said, quote, "Remember this past June when a call-driven gamma squeeze in GME was extinguished by the company suddenly issuing 75 million additional shares of stock, causing a complete halt to the upward squeeze? There is no way to issue additional shares of Bitcoin. There will be no halting gamma squeezes. Buckle in for Bitcoin options." So similar to the ETFs, there is pent-up demand for these products that are onshore and regulated. And like many other recent things, this is good for Bitcoin. For our next story, we have massive news coming out of China. Late Monday night in the US, they announced some massive monetary stimulus. They announced rate cuts, they announced lower rates for existing mortgages, they said they will continue to support monetary policy as needed, which that last part just means that they will make money as cheap as needed and print as much as needed to keep its markets afloat. All of this came in after China's economic goal of 5% growth was cast in doubt due to deflationary pressures in the economy. On top of slashing interest rates and committing to keep markets afloat, they also announced that securities firms, which are stock investment firms, will have the ability to borrow from the PBOC to buy stocks. So they are worried about a continuing decline in their equity market and are bringing in as many buyers and borrowers as possible. They also announced at least 50 billion won of liquidity to support stocks. So China is very clearly firing up the money printers to support their equities markets, and this is right on cue. Global central banks want to tighten and ease together to mask the effects it has on their currency in relation to one another. So now that the Fed has done their initial cut, exchange rates won't suffer too much with the PBOC and other central banks doing the same. Dan Tapiero said, quote, "Huge macro event. Things are so bad in China, the government flinches, QE for China equity, rate cuts, big liquidity coming, the low is likely in for Chinese assets, bazooka, bullish for gold and Bitcoin." Gold has reacted to this by hitting another new all-time high at $2,646 an ounce at the time of recording. And I'm assuming Bitcoin will also react even more violently to the upside in the coming weeks. Fred Krueger also tweeted saying, quote, "The China 10-year note is 2%. We'll be there soon with the US 10-year. In that kind of yield environment, 300K Bitcoin seems normal." If you look at this chart of PBOC liquidity injections, you notice that just a year ago, at the end of September and early October of 2023, the PBOC injected monetary stimulus into the economy, and Bitcoin reacted by going from the mid-20,000s to 40,000. This was also on the tails of a US spot Bitcoin ETF, but it's important to remember that Bitcoin is a global asset and reacts to money printing in all jurisdictions, even though the US still has the largest impact on global markets. But if this year is anything like last year, my call of 100K by December or February still stands. In fact, yesterday on Twitter, I said that I think there is a decent chance that Bitcoin can reach a new stock price all-time high at $313 a share, and do this by the end of year. This was first set during the dot-com bubble, and when we surpass this price, it will be one of the craziest stock charts of all time. As Bitcoin Future pointed out, we're already there when you look at market cap, which is true. MSTR has been diluting the stock a lot to accretively purchase more Bitcoin, so a $313 stock price will be over 6x the market cap that it was in 2000. But as investors, the price of the stock is what matters, so I'm still bullish on this chart. If you enjoyed the video, consider hitting the like button and check out MSTR Pro in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.